share through similar channels once we have that confirmed, and you can distribute it through your networks, and it's got a CC by SA license. If you're not sure what that is, if you've got a link there to follow up. So, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the presentation. And I guess some of the things, there's a lot of moving parts in this, so we're trying to do the best to be clear and to give you as much information to digest all the information that we're sharing. So the overview, of course, is the who, why, what, where, and how, and who else, and I'll come to that, of this project. The context, which is what I'll be looking at, speaking about the Commonwealth and the Sustainable Development Goals. Some definitions and assumptions will be part of that. Then I'll shift to my colleague Mairette Newman, and she'll speak about the Youth Work Project and this consortium that we're all a part of. Then I'll shift to Gary, my colleague Gary, who will speak about some theoretical considerations about how we're framing this project in the context of educational transfer. Then we'll shift to my colleague Sam Naidu, and he will speak to course development and online learning. Go back to Gary to talk about the methods of the project and some discussion Q&A. If you're a little bit in the dark, you should be, because I haven't gotten any of the real details yet. And I'm still not there yet. I'm first going to talk about the presenters. So there's 4 of us. Again, my name is Kirk Perris. I'm the advisor education at the Commonwealth of Learning, which is an intergovernmental organization located in Vancouver, British Columbia. Below this is my colleague Mairette Newman. Dr. Newman is the education specialist for one of the COAL initiatives, the Virtual University for Small States of the Commonwealth. Mairette will offer some more details, as will I, about that momentarily. The top right corner is Gary Pluim. Dr. Pluim is assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University in the Orillia campus, just north of Toronto in the city of Barrie. Last but not least is my colleague, Dr. Sam Naidu. Sam is located in Fiji, and he is the Vice-Chancellor at the University of the South Pacific. Maybe I'll just quickly invite each of my colleagues to say a quick hello to all of you, and so you can put a name to the face. Sorry, I'll gesture first to Mairette.
Hi everyone, I'm Mairette Newman. I'm going to be talking to you very briefly about the work of the Commonwealth Higher Education Youth Work Consortium and telling you a little bit about what we're doing, particularly in the small countries of the Commonwealth. Happy to see you all there. I see many of my friends are there. Thank you for joining. Hope you enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Mairette. Gesture to Gary.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gary Pluim. I'm at Lakehead University in Orillia in Canada. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to speak today a little bit about the work of the consortium through an analytical lens, speaking about the issue of education transfer and youth and how we might map our work into a research project.
Hi everybody, this is Naidu from University of the South Pacific. As Kirk said, very early in the morning, Friday morning, about 6 o'clock. So pardon me if I sound a bit croaky, but I'll talk to you later about the course design and development process later on. Okay. Kirk, I think you're still on mute.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah. All right. Okay, shifting to the next slide. So just wanted to give an overview of what the project is, the what, where, why, how, who else. So this project is very much focused on professional development of youth workers through upskilling through online learning. So we're developing online courses, which is really the crux of this project. We'll certainly expand upon. Where we're focusing on the small states of the Commonwealth, and I'll expand on what that means, but the the corners of the Commonwealth where we're operating: Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, South Pacific. Why? Youth workers are under-resourced, they lack capacity, and of course, in these contexts, youth populations are disproportionately large. And so we recognize and we want to obviously optimize or leverage the demographic dividend within these country contexts. How? We're doing this through workshops. Gary and Sam will speak to that, as will Mairette. We've been doing a series of workshops around the Commonwealth. They are focused on sensitization to decision makers in ministries, youth workers themselves, to sensitize them to online learning, the context of the Youth Work Project, to deliberate, build some consensus, get some inputs on courses that we should be designing for their particular needs. And another, how is this being funded? Well, Cole is the primary funder, but then we have other funders. Mairette will speak to the consortium. There's 2 other partners there. And of course, through Sam at USP and Gary at Lakehead, they are certainly providing in-kind contributions with their professional time. And of course, USP hosted the workshop that Gary will speak to last June. Who else? I've mentioned we're under the umbrella of this consortium called the Commonwealth Higher Education Consortium for Youth Work. Mairette will speak to that. And of course, who else? We're looking for new country partners, regional partners, and perhaps some of you will be interested in speaking with us more about that. And of course, we look forward to any comments or questions you have in the discussion. Our objectives of the presentation just really speak about the centrality of this partnership as you're learning and increasingly be aware that there's a lot of moving parts. Of course, we're focused on youth work in the Commonwealth, the processes of education transfer. We've got this suite of courses that came from the University of the West Indies that are going to be utilized and are currently being utilized and repurposed for contextual contexts, for contextualization in different regions of the world. And we'll certainly be speaking to the Pacific context. There's some nuances of online learning. This is Sam's area of expertise, and he'll speak to that. And then, of course, we'll talk about this Pacific intervention that we had started last June and the progress we've made, and the expansion looking into the Caribbean and ideally the Bahamas. And it's good to see that we have one of our colleagues from the Bahamas online. And then we'll talk a little bit about the methods of the project, and then, of course, implications. This is just a graphic which I'll come back to a bit later on. So I want to just set the context. Those that may or may not be familiar with some of the contours of the Commonwealth and the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 4, which focuses on education. Before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about some definitions and some assumptions that we have going into this project. So just some definitions. What do we mean by youth work? Again, we're talking about those individuals that are professionals, aspiring professionals in the youth work space. Refers to all forms of rights-based youth engagement, really focusing on, trying to support the social, political, economic empowerment, if not participation of young people through various learning contexts. Non-formal learning is certainly central to that. The professionalization of youth workers. A lot of youth workers, from our analysis and understanding, don't necessarily have all the skills that they need to support youth. And that the professionalization of this space also speaks to engaging with governments and other organizations around policy building, policy development, training, capacity for remuneration, monitoring and evaluation, training and certification. And we're certainly speaking to, training, certification, professional development. Small states are officially defined as having about 1.5 million inhabitants or less, give or take. Globally, there are 50 countries that meet this criteria, and then there's 31 small states in the Commonwealth, which speaks very much to Mairette's work. They're generally defined as being low middle income countries, isolated or fragmented, as many of them are island states, small economic bases, yet large youth populations. The definition of educational transfer Many might be familiar with these terms, but the use of educational artifacts that are purposely borrowed, which is more aligned to the current context, or in the colonial period where it was more imposed. There's also the invisible contexts that are around that. Those are more theoretical considerations that Gary will speak to. And then online learning, of course, you know, as much as this is top of mind for many of us educators right now, we recognize there's a lot of nuance, and certainly speaks to my work and Mairette's work at Cole. Som is one of the global experts, frankly, in this space. Scenarios where some, if not the majority of learning, takes place, of course, through online or through the internet, and usually defined as a separation between the physical separation between teacher, learner, and other learners. There's that graphic again, which I'll come back to. Just wanted to add a little bit of color to my slides. Our assumptions, of course, the significant need to develop a cadre of professionals in youth work to work with youth citizens. Assumptions, of course, youth are underserviced. They are generally, as a cohort, high level of unemployment and disenfranchised. At the same time, we recognize there's sufficient competencies and access to learn online, given the increasing ubiquity of internet penetration. Of course, our other assumptions, there's local participation, interest in this initiative relative to course participation and delivery of youth workers. And of course, the other assumption is recognition for the courses that we are designing as professional development, which would be recognized ideally by ministries and other government agencies and or non-government agencies. I'm going to shift now just to speak a little bit about the Commonwealth. This graphic shows the 53 Commonwealth states. You squint your eyes, you can see some highlighted green dots. Certainly there's a large collection in the Caribbean and in the South Pacific, approximately 10 nations each. And then other corners of Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and there's the graphic. The Commonwealth is defined as having almost 2.5 billion inhabitants. And interestingly enough, 60% are under the age of 30. So we are looking at young populations, which reinforces, I think, the importance and purpose of our work. My organization, Mairette's organization, is known as the Commonwealth of Learning. We, as I said before, we're located in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada. We've been in operation for about 30 years. The essential mantra of our organization is to help Commonwealth governments and institutions use technology to improve and expand learning for sustainable development. We operate in that mantra, or in our tagline about sustainable development in our current strategic plan. It's really education for sustainable development. And we're aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular SDG 4, which speaks to quality education, equitability of access. There's a whole list of targets that you can certainly see on the UN's website. As I said, we're focusing mostly on target 4.6, which speaks to this idea of universal literacy and numeracy, or to achieve that by 2030. And then more specifically under that tag, or under that target, is to ensure by 2030 that all youth and adults, men and women, achieve those benchmarks of literacy and numeracy. So I just want to summarize a bit, because there are some moving parts to this, but the project in context. So you'll see Cole, we operate in terms of, we're a small organization. There's really only about 12 of us professionals, and we work through our networks throughout the Commonwealth. We very much operate to build capacity, build models, develop learning materials, and support the development of policies, with the idea, again, coming back to the push to move more and more learning online or through technology-enabled learning. We do that through varying initiatives. Mairette's initiative, the Virtual University for Small States of the Commonwealth, is one of our 9 initiatives. I run our regional operations. I work through a cadre of regional centers, which is identified there. My colleague Som from Fiji is the director of one of our regional centers. He wears a few other hats. He's a pro Vice-Chancellor as well. So he's very much, the online flexible learning guru at USP, and again, has an international reputation. So through these regional centers, we also leverage our initiatives. So this is an example of this work. We also rely on partners. Some of you are our partners, as I know. Gary, representing Lakehead University, is one of our newest partners. And so we're constantly trying to expand our network with the right experts. Gary, of course, is an expert in youth. So you can see how all these parts are in some way are very complementary. Another sort of summary here to the fourth box around youth workers. Again, the aim is to work to professionalize youth workers who are working with youth on the ground in predominantly small states of the Commonwealth. The aim, of course, is professional development of youth workers, and this is being operated or trying to be executed exclusively through an online, not exclusively, predominantly through an online space. Mairette might speak to this a little bit, how we have also some blended learning initiatives underway or in the planning stage. Finally, just again, summary, we respond to SDG 4, which is focusing on quality education as an organization, as COLE, but then specifically in this project, we're looking at target 4.6, which focuses on literacy and numeracy, and youth is certainly central to that. The last part, which again, Mairette will speak to in a moment, that last box on the bottom, is also an important and essential partner are the two other institutions that operate under the consortium, which initiated this project. So without further ado, I'll just defer to Mairette to speak to that, and I'll mute my mic. And I'll try best again to encourage people, if you have any questions, comments, I'll be facilitating, so to continue to contribute in the chat room. All right, to Mairette, thank you.
Thank you, Kirk. So Kirk has painted a picture there of the broader context. And what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is hone in on how the consortium, the full name of the consortium is the Commonwealth Higher Education Youth Work Consortium, but I will refer to it as the consortium. So I'm going to hone in on how the consortium is working to advance professionalization of youth work in the Commonwealth. And as our panel title suggests, I will be paying special attention to the consortium's work with small states of the Commonwealth. So really quickly, the consortium was established in 2015, and it comprises 3 lead partners. There's the Commonwealth Secretariat based in London, and we actually have online Dr. Amina Osman, who is the liaison person at the Commonwealth Secretariat and is a major player in this consortium. So we have the Commonwealth Secretariat. We also have the University of the West Indies Open Campus, and there we have Dr. Denise Gaspard-Richards, who leads us on that. And of course, we have my own organization, the Commonwealth of Learning, based in Vancouver. And so, as you can imagine, each of these institutions or organizations brings complementary expertise and resources to advance youth work education and training within the consortium. So this consortium is an online degree consortium. So as lead partners, you see on your screen there what it is we are responsible for. We need to ensure that the open source youth work learning materials are available to institutions who are interested. We provide support to those institutions. And those institutions are not always higher education institutions, sometimes they're training agencies. Whoever is interested in offering a credential in youth work using online or blended modalities. So we have an MOU that you see there that formalizes our cooperation, and we work hard to strengthen the capacities of these institutions to customize the materials for their respective contexts and to deliver the program online. We also, of course, provide assistance with, as you see there, monitoring and evaluation and quality assurance. Next slide, please, Kirk. So underpinning Next slide, please, Kirk. Okay, so underpinning the consortium's vision and goals is a conviction that professionalization will help to address the critical shortage of qualified youth practitioners. And by extension, it will improve the quality of service that young people receive. And this is the glue that binds us in the consortium. So the consortium, as you see here, it obviously recognizes the central role that young people play in national and social development, their potential to drive social, economic, and political progress. And in addition, the Commonwealth has over the years promoted policies and legislation and other kinds of mechanisms in order to strengthen the youth work sector. So the position of the consortium is clear. Youth must benefit from qualified professional youth work practitioners, and these practitioners must be grounded in best practice. So while there is clearly consistency in terms of our values and our vision and our purpose, the diversity of the Commonwealth, next slide please, Kirk, the diversity of the Commonwealth, the historical, the social, the cultural and political factors within each country that influence and shape its needs and responses do present a number of issues and challenges. So when the consortium was established in 2015, there was already a history of commitment to strengthening the professionalization of youth work. However, it was very clear that the sector remained under-recognized and under-resourced. So a major challenge for the consortium relates to diversity. So who is a youth worker? And indeed, you might ask, what is youth work? How you answer that question, how you understand that, depends on which part of the world you live in. Youth workers are attached to the police force, to churches, to NGOs, to community centers, schools, youth agencies, sports clubs, drop-in centers, I mean, the list goes on. And many of these youth workers are volunteers, or they're self-made youth workers who have, if you like, fallen into the job. Few of them have formal qualifications. So you couple that with a professional body of knowledge that is still emerging, and the absence of policy frameworks, poor regulation of practice, limited training opportunities, it's not really surprising that many of the countries we work with, and I'm especially referencing here the small countries, are, if you like, groping their way, and I'm quoting here from CIRCOM, groping their way towards professionalization. By 2017, the consortium did have a clearer picture thanks to research that set out to establish a baseline that then informed the planning and implementation of the consortium initiatives. And some of the key findings I just want to share with you briefly from that research were, they surveyed 35 countries. 12 of the 35 had actually taken significant steps to professionalize the youth work sector. 11 had policies that recognized youth work, and 25 had at least a diploma level qualification available for youth workers. So there was indeed a sense of advancement, but in spite of these significant steps, the conclusion of that study was that formal recognition of the profession was deemed weak and gaps in support of professional practice persisted. So the consortium is working to fill those gaps. Next slide, please, Kirk. So who are the institutions who have joined the consortium as implementing partners? And I know that we actually have a few representatives from those institutions here with us as listening to the panel presentations. You see here a list. We have signed letters of understanding with 18 institutions, which are at various stages of the process, from planning to implementation. 8 of these countries are indeed.
I just listening.
Okay,
I say you probably didn't.
Okay, can we ask everybody to please mute their mics? We're getting some interference here. So could I ask everyone to please ensure your mics are muted? Thank you. So 8 of these are small countries. And from these 18 institutions, we actually have 37 countries represented. So it's pretty large. 13 countries in Africa and Asia, 12 countries in each of the 2 regions, the Pacific and the Caribbean. And you will be hearing from USP in the Pacific in the next segment when Sam speaks. Next slide, please, Kirk. So what does support from the consortium look like? Well, it usually starts with preliminary discussions. And it's very important to note that those preliminary discussions have to involve the Ministry of Youth, or the ministry that has responsibility for youth. They have to involve the agencies, the youth work agencies, and if there are any professional associations in that country, as well, of course, as the institution or the provider. And these discussions usually lead to signing this letter of understanding. We have engaged in a number of regional workshops, and you're seeing some photographs here from some of those workshops. And those workshops bring together leaders, academics, practitioners, policymakers who discuss and deliberate to try to identify the core competencies for youth work in their respective territories or in their respective contexts. And then they set to work on creating a plan and eventually contextualizing the materials that we give them so that they can be used in their jurisdictions. We, of course, bring on board experts, practitioners, as well as scholars. And indeed, we have one person with us, I see Christina's with us, who actually bridges that gap beautifully between the scholarship and the practitioner side of youth work. We also, in addition to assisting with the development of an action plan, we also provide a suite of readiness tools. We offer targeted training if it is needed, and all kinds of additional support through communities of practice. I see Imogen is with us, and she actually leads one of those communities of practice. Imogen is in Namibia, and she's brought together several representatives from across Africa, which has been really helpful. And as I mentioned earlier, we also assist with M&E and monitoring and evaluation. So what are the issues and challenges that surface, especially for small countries? Next slide, please, Kirk. So I have put these issues and challenges into 5 key areas for convenience. They're in these discrete categories, but the truth is that these issues overlap. Stakeholders. I mentioned to you earlier the importance of input from stakeholders, the involvement of the ministries and practitioners and academics and administrators, NGOs. But reaching agreement about the competencies, reaching consensus about the key skills that youth workers should have in a particular context, reaching consensus about the field work. What should it look like? How should it be assessed? How should this youth worker in training be supervised? By whom? All of that is extremely challenging. And these debates amongst the stakeholders, and we've been part of this in the regional workshops, these debates translate into tensions around the curriculum and what should be taught. So to build a quality curriculum, we need persons with content knowledge, we need persons with knowledge about youth work, with knowledge of the content. If somebody has their mic on, could we ask you to please ensure that your mic is on? Thank you. So we need persons, as I said, with knowledge of the context, pedagogical content knowledge, knowledge about online learning and online learners. For all countries and for all populations, it's going to be very difficult to have one curriculum. The same curriculum cannot be appropriate for all. So meeting this challenge requires attention to customization. And a little later, in unpacking the concept of international education transfer, I think Gary will talk about some of those tensions and the importance of cultural relevance of materials and resources that actually define that curriculum. So the next category of challenge or issue here speaks to the qualifications and competencies of youth workers. So while while we have been engaging the institutions, we have found that faculty are often from other related disciplines. They're from sociology or psychology or from counseling or indeed from education, teaching, but very few have youth work qualifications or youth work experience. So without a background or training in youth work, they are going to require support. And this is where the consortium has an important role to play. The teaching of youth work is key. We try to ensure that academic practitioner balance by offering training to ensure that persons working on the program are not only grounded in their own disciplines, but they understand youth work and are comfortable preparing materials for online or blended contexts, and they're comfortable teaching online. And this is a blend of knowledge and skills that is very difficult to find in one person. Access. So by making the program available as a blended program or an online program, the institutions are clearly expanding access to larger numbers of students. So persons can continue to work while studying, they can continue to fulfill their social and family responsibilities, etc. We all know about those advantages. However, in some of the small countries, there are challenges that are related to connectivity, availability, bandwidth issues, the geographical factors, as well as the associated costs. Data is very expensive in small countries, and access to suitable devices can also be limited. So while, yes, we are expanding access, I don't want anybody to feel that that is the panacea and that is magic. That access does come, it is challenging. I'm going to quickly complete because I think I might have gone over my time and Kirk will get very cross with me. The last category there speaks to quality assurance. So I will just quickly say that another benefit that the consortium brings is the requirement that the programs, any institution offering a program, the youth work program, must ensure that it is recognized or registered by a national qualifications framework or indeed by the transnational qualifications framework, which rests with my initiative at the Commonwealth of Learning, the virtual university for small states of the Commonwealth. So the next segment from Dr. Naidu will give you further insight, I think, into how these issues actually play out, because he's going to describe USP's experience as an implementing partner. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Mairette. It's Gary that's up next, followed by Sam.
My apologies. I'm so sorry.
So Gary, over to you. Thank you, Mairette.
No problem at all. And thanks Mairette, for that really exemplary high-level picture, right, of the work of the consortium. And Mairette points to some of these challenges, right? And what I'm hoping to do in my segment here is to expound upon these complexities and these problems, and to bring a bit of an analytical lens. One way we could look at the work of the consortium and this whole work of transferring youth work is through this lens of educational transfer. So looking at the research in educational transfer, because that's really what we're speaking about. Those participants who have joined us today from the field of CIES will recognize that this is a central area in comparative and international education studies and research. And we have people like David Phillips or Iveta Slova, this book here, Gita Steiner-Hamsi, who have looked at critically at educational borrowing and lending. Traditionally, this field has looked at historically 200 years of British interests in Germany, in France, in Prussia, and the education systems there that have led to success. The field has looked at post-war Japan and the restructuring of the education system in Japan after the war, post-Soviet education systems as well. The field of educational borrowing and lending goes back as far as education. And there are big advantages to educational borrowing and lending, of course. You know, why would a jurisdiction create its own system when something else exists elsewhere? Right? There's advantages in terms of expediency, responding to domestic education and development issues, solidarity, international cooperation. So there are big advantages, right? in educational transfer, but there are good reasons why people are concerned about educational transfer and borrowing and lending as well. So one key question is for whose benefit, right? If we look at the work of Phillips and Oakes, for example, they speak about this continuum of educational transfer from imposed all the way to influential. So it's a continuum from imposed to constrained to purposeful to influential. And they talk about whether the policy or the curriculum is imposed versus to whether it's borrowing. And when we think about the work of VUSC, when we think about the work of the consortium, certainly on the surface, we might look at the curriculum as being purposefully borrowed. Phillips and Oakes, for example, speak about the assumption that one country initiates interest in or attraction to foreign educational practices. And that's generally what we're seeing here if we look at this on a theoretical level. As we go deeper, we might ask some deeper questions, right? So for example, for whose benefit? And how is one country learning from another country? And how is the other country actually benefiting, or another institution benefiting from the transferring to that first country? What we're really talking about is what comes with this package that's transferred, right? What are the values? What are the hidden curriculums? We know that curriculum is not neutral in the transfer of culture, for example. And culture is complex as we speak about the nuances of language, the nuances of gender and patriarchy, for example, of colonization, and so on. You know, and we look at that too when we look at the backdrop of the Commonwealth. That we know that earlier research has suggested that the British colonial education policy throughout the early 20th century that was disseminated to over 30 former British colonies, for example, that research suggests that those education systems in Africa and Asia and the Caribbean incurred a lot of benefit to the British. So one question we ask ourselves critically as we look at this analytically is what lies below the surface that are harder for the actors involved to be aware of and for us to see in these processes. Another analytical lens that we can use that is drawing from Phillips and Oakes as well is the stages of educational transfer. So if we think about how this education transfer over periods of time and why the transfer may or may not be successful, we can look at how cross-national attraction begins with impulses and externalizing potential and the decision-making phase. And in the case of VUSC and the most recent workshop at the University of the South Pacific, we would say that these first two stages have clearly been attended to. What we will look at, and especially in this research that I'll speak about a little bit later, is these levels of implementation and internalization of the actual curriculum and the policy and so on. So there are questions about the uptake, questions about the speed in which the curriculum is embraced at the partner institutions, questions about the capacity and the suitability and SED. So there are issues with that. And then we look at internalization or indigenization, for example, of the curriculum and of these processes. And I should say with that said, these processes, and as we work through these workshops, one of the key goals is the local curation of the curriculum for content and context. And so as we peel apart this onion of context and what context is most important, these are some questions that we have. So what contextual factors are most important when we think about this educational transfer? And how much context is relevant before the actual process of educational transfer becomes redundant or not that efficient at all? And who's to be the judge of the local context as well? So these contextual issues are at the forefront, but one of the areas in common that Kirk spoke about before is the contextual commonalities among small states. And we can ask ourselves, what are these contextual commonalities that run across small states in the world and specifically in the Commonwealth. We can point to questions about capacity in small states, about particular vulnerability perhaps, about fragmentation and connections to the global community. But we might also look at connections in terms of South-South transfer, that many small states lie across the global South. VUSC, for example, the suite of courses were produced at the University of West Indies. So here we're looking at a South-South transfer. And so this issue of context and contextual commonalities are huge. I know in the last workshop at the University of the South Pacific, we constantly referred to this idea of what's specific in the Pacific. And so we had our participants, we continue to brainstorm about these specific commonalities in the South Pacific related to cultural, linguistic, historic, social, economic, and political. So Kirk, I'll go to the next slide and speak about another central aspect to this work is really unpacking this idea of youth as a social category. And in some senses, we all sort of come with this assumption and idea of who youth are and what youth work is. But there's a lot of tensions within this realm as well. So what is this youth and this idea of youth and what comes to mind when we speak of youth? Some people speak of youthfulness as a category that surmounts the idea of youth. So these bullets. So first of all, is youth a period of transition? So is youth a time in our lives where we just embrace it's moving from child to adult, from education to employment, from dependent to being independent? Or is youth a life stage in its own right, compared to infancy, compared to child? Biologically, we know that there are specific characteristics with youth, in terms of frontal lobe development and synapses and so on. But it brings around this debate in terms of ages of youth. Some jurisdictions talk about youth as 15 to 21, and others from 18 to 30, which creates this great disjuncture. The second bullet, youth as a homogeneous group versus youth as infinitely diverse. Can we say anything that's absolute and universal about youth? Perhaps they're a distinct group in terms of their energy, intensity, zeal. Are there any universal qualities, though, that cross nations, races, genders, and social classes? Which brings this third point, a universal approach to youth. And can we think that there's something universal that applies to youth across this planet versus the particular settings that youth are involved with, and how important the setting and context are in terms of youth, in terms of global, north-south relations, in terms of the birthplace, rich, poor, indigenous, settler, male or female. Fourthly, youth as passive individuals versus youth as socially active agents, Oftentimes youth are seen as a target group, as passive individuals, as beneficiaries from funding and from programming focused on youth. But youth are also socially active agents with the ability to understand and make sense of the world around them and act upon them. Interestingly, youth are one category, it's one social category that we all belong to at some stage in our lives, which is different from other types of categories. Fifthly, youth as an individual versus youth as a social group. And one facet about youth is when we think about the global issues that affect the world today, they affect youth most intensely, most dramatically, and in a way that's most exacerbated. When we think of social media and how that affects youth, when we think about the climate crisis and how that affects youth more than any other segment of the population, and how 1/3 of the youth live in fragile and conflict-affected states. So all of these global issues are affect youth disproportionately. And finally, this tension between positive youth development and problem-based youth work. So traditionally and historically, youth work has always focused on the problems of youth, So for example, fixing the problems of youth and how they can be addressed, versus this dissatisfaction of that approach towards a new idea that doesn't underestimate the true capacities of young people and looks at their developmental potential rather than their problems. So a real kind of rights-based approach. So finally for this section, Kirk, if you could flip to the next slide, in the work that we're doing, this recognition of the ethics of youth work takes a prominent focus, right? So that addressing these critical issues, addressing these analytical views, that the professional care in youth, that youth support workers would support young people so that they can better represent themselves, that there's a building of personal awareness of expectations of the strengths of youth, and so that they know them. The social and political education of youth, so that youth are able to think critically in a social and political and global context. Fourthly, the professional judgment of youth, that the work in this field is done through evidence-based research, that there's a rights-based approach, a human rights-based approach that recognizes young people's agency in determining what's best for them. And finally, youth participation and ensuring that youth work promotes young people's agency and that they are active participants, right? So that youth are partners in decision making, and that this is something we grapple with as well in the work that we're doing. So as Naidu continues this presentation, he's going to speak about the most recent workshop, but we can point out that youth were actually among the primary participants in this stakeholders workshop to work towards the professionalization of a youth field in the South Pacific and the development of the online modules. So I'll pass over I will really pass over to Naidu this time.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. And Mairette and Kirk, I think you guys have really laid the foundation for this project or work or this initiative very well. Listening to all of you for the first time, it becomes very clear to me what we are on about. So about this time last year, or was it June or July, the same group of people held a workshop, and this workshop was held at this university where I am, the University of the South Pacific. I want to say a little bit about the University of the South Pacific, if some of us are not very aware of it. I'm based in Fiji, and Fiji is one of the larger countries in the region, but it's a university that's owned by 12 countries in the region. So there's 14 campuses. So much like the University of West Indies, it's a regional university. It covers a very large area. The physical area, the geographical area is as big as the United States. So you can imagine how big we are talking about. And it's not all land, it's actually all water. So we held this workshop. We organized this workshop about June or July. It was at the university, and we pulled together a whole bunch of stakeholders of the sorts that Kirk and Gary and Mairette have been talking about, including themselves. Kirk and I actually facilitated the workshop, and participants in the workshop were youth workers from throughout the region that I was talking about, government representatives from the Ministry of Education and representatives from the Ministries of Youth and Sport. It was a 3-day workshop. It was not so much about capacity building and consensus building, but it was about capacity and consensus building in terms of what we need to do along the lines that you've been hearing Kirk and Gary and Mairette talk about. So when we put all of these people together, and there were about 20 or 30 people there, both experts and practitioners, how were we going to go about? And you heard Mairette and other people talk about the courses that were developed at the University of West Indies, but you also heard them talk about the difficulties in educational transfer or education transfer from one place to the other. So what we did was we began with identification of competencies. So we say to people, all right, you guys know what you're doing. what do you think are the key competencies of youth workers in your context? So we went through a workshopping exercise and people listed down the competencies. And then we tried to, Gary and I tried to cluster these competencies so that we can see clusters of competencies, because obviously there'll be some duplication when that kind of work takes place. We came up with these 7 clusters, which then became the foundations of the customization of the courses for the Pacific region. And these were along these lines: youth entrepreneurship, the use of art for social change. You can imagine, I mean, art is something that is esoteric, but partly because there were people in that group who were interested and had expertise and experience in the use of art for social change. And that's how that topic came about, although it might not be generic, but it's a very interesting concept, isn't it? And likewise, using faith, for example, that Mairette was talking about, in the Pacific Island, you know, faith, Christian faith in particular, is very strong. And we wanted to capitalize on that rather than have that as the issue. Youth rights, civic engagement, and political participation, good governance, youth and climate change, because climate change is very big. There's a lot of small islands in this part of the world and in other parts of the world that are practically disappearing. You know, the waves from one side of the island, you know, crash over to the other side of the island. So in many cases, people live on a small strip of coral reef, literally speaking. And then you have youth advocacy in community service and health and well-being. So these were the big clusters that came out of that workshopping exercise. So we use these big clusters as the foundations of the modules that we then started to develop. So this is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, in the Kirk's words. How did we go about developing or customizing or developing and customizing and developing these modules for the Pacific region? Next slide, Kirk. So what we did is we took all the advice that you heard from Kirk and Gary and Mairette about how we need to be aware of the context and the nuances of the context. And we were very aware that this is not a content-driven learning experience. This will have to be a context-driven learning experience. So what we did, we used, I mean, remember Gary talked a while ago about problematizing the situation. So we used a scenario-based situated cognitive model of learning, which basically says that, you know, the context is the driver of the learning experience. And what we tried to do was to say so we divided the workshop participants into groups. So say, all right, you're looking at this module, you are looking at that module, another group of people are looking at another module. And to say, all right, first of all, you need to look at the kinds of situations that youth workers will be confronted with. And then based on that kind of a situation or the problem situation, you begin to identify what might be the learning outcomes. And so the scenario-based learning approach takes them through those steps in the process. There's 6 or 7 steps. You first identify the typical learning experience design process that we're all familiar with. You identify the learning outcomes, then you problematize the situation, present learners with an authentic learning situation, a scenario within which they will be presented a problem that they will have to address with the help of educational resources that would be, in this case, open educational resources, so that they can be customized, they can be adopted, they can be adapted. And I'm assuming that a lot of us in this audience will be familiar with open educational resources. And then assessment will be also tied to the activities that people will carry out. So we are not assessing acquisition or understanding of a particular type of content or subject matter, but how they resolve the problem in the situation or the scenario that they have been presented with. and then giving feedback on the on the responses to the problem situation. So that would be the process that we took them through in the module development. Now that module development is continuing. Some of the modules are actually coming to fruition 8 or 9 months after, and they will be presented online on a platform called USB Global. USB Global is an initiative of the University of the South Pacific, which takes courses that are developed and you know, coming out of the university to a global audience. So you don't have to register, you don't have to be a registered student of the University of the South Pacific to take advantage of these courses. So that's the beauty of it. And therefore anybody from anywhere in the world can register in that module and get credit for that module. And it, as I said earlier on, the course itself is an open educational resource. So anybody else can then take it away, adopt it, adapt it, and customize it for their purposes, just as we are drawing from the expertise of the University of West Indies. There's no fees, of course, with the goodwill of the Commonwealth of Learning and the Commonwealth Secretariat. You don't have to pay fees for it. And Mairette will be able to talk more about the process for that. So what we are trying to do is also very consistent with the ethos and character and culture of the University of the South Pacific. And so I go back to the point that I made earlier on. When the University of the South Pacific was established in 1968, 40 years ago, one of the things that was very important about the setting of the university is that no one of the island states in the region is capable of setting up universities on their own. So a regional university was necessary. For that reason, it needed to be open. It needed to operate in an open access environment so that it took education out to the communities and the students where they were in the region, as opposed to bringing everybody to one location. So it's a completely different model of higher education, which is becoming very, attractive given the COVID crisis right now, because we are already in a distributed and a flexible learning arrangement. So thank you very much, Kirk. I'm going to leave it there for Gary, I suppose, to pick it up from where I left off.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'll just move it forward, and we're going to try and wrap up in about 10 minutes or so, and then move to Q&A. So Gary, over to you. Thanks, Tom, for that presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk, and thanks, Sam, for a great overview of this workshop. And as we step away from the workshop and look back on it, there's a number of levels that we can look back at the workshop, the curriculum specifically, but also the broader purpose. And one of the goals of this workshop was to be able to build a sense of the community amongst participants and youth workers in the South Pacific. Across Micronesia, Polynesia, and Melanesia, we had good representation. And there was a broad sense of that, right? So if you think a 4-day period, we spent some time looking at theories of youth, the vision for these modules. We had sessions on the critical issues of education borrowing, like we spoke about before. And then also the technical learning in online OER competency-based curriculum that Sam spoke about. We spent a lot of time in group work. So groups going out, working on deciding the curriculum, coming back, sharing, presenting highlights, refining, editing, and then finally the final presentations with the packaging and the work towards the modules. And then we spent some time with debriefing the sessions and offering a chance for feedback. And out of those, some of the highlights for the participants were to work with their opportunity to work with a very diverse group and learning about different issues relating to youth across the South Pacific. They also highlighted the opportunity to be able to develop online post-secondary modules and courses, the kind of thing they said they would have never otherwise had that opportunity to do. And then finally, one of the highlights was to hear the real life scenarios through the participants' backgrounds from across the South Pacific. In terms of recommendations, some of the strongest recommendations were to, in advance of running a workshop in the future, was to be able to preload it with other information coming into the workshop, so that we might do some of the work in advance and then come to the workshop hitting the ground running. For some of them, they said it took them some time to get their head around the complexities of the work that they were doing. So it took them a little while to really have a full vision of the end goal. And finally, issues around coordination with other existing youth initiatives across the South Pacific, with other international agencies, right, from the UN and other multilateral organizations that are doing some kind of similar work. The bigger part of the bigger vision, though, and the bigger questions is, how does this contribute to the overall professionalization of the field of youth work in the South Pacific? Or if we were to say more broadly, in any jurisdiction? What would a youth work community of practice look like in the South Pacific? Who would be part of that community? And what are the expectations of professionalizing a field of youth work? And what is necessary to meet those expectations? So Kirk, if you could flip to the next slide, I'll just do a brief reminder of how diverse this field of youth work is, and these many kind of moving components, right? If we think of this constellation in any kind of professional field, but specifically in youth work, we can think from left to right that we would need an understood and formulated definition, that we would have to have country level legislation and policies that recognize youth work as a distinct profession. Looking at professional organizations and associations, competency standards, ethical standards, clearly defined qualifications, the professional validation of youth work in education, and then also practices for accountability and public investment in the sector. So we can see that this establishment of a field is broad, and it would be a fairly iterative process too, right? Not just the workshop itself, but that we see the workshop as really central in that stimulation of the professionalization of the field. So one of the questions we're left with is, how might the workshop really stimulate the field, and what kind of work does it do? Which leads us to kind of where we're at right now. And Kirk, if you could go to that final slide, and the questions we ask ourselves about where do we go from here? And if we're to connect this to a research arm, a collaborative research plan, what kind of research should we be doing, right? And so all of these components and these discussions and this practice has inspired a research plan that asks ourselves, how might the workshop and the creation of the curriculum and the modules promote the development of a professionalized youth work field? And what conditions promote and what conditions prevent educational transfer of youth work curriculums across small states? So we're currently working towards a research project. We've received funding from the Social Studies and Humanities Research Council of Canada to work on a partnership research plan. And we're looking at locations in the Caribbean to hold our next workshop, and to develop basically a case study of an upcoming multi-day youth workshop for stakeholders, and that this workshop would develop a baseline study for comparison with other workshops, including the one in the South Pacific and other future workshops, to really break apart these nuances of educational transfer insofar as it relates to youth work. There's the added benefit of the further development of partnerships, and we would use a mixed methods approach with pre and post workshop interviews. We would focus on video-based observation as a methodological tool to really understand the nuances of what's happening in these workshops and the success of the development of the modules and curriculums. Focus groups and document analysis of the of the curriculum, of the curricular artifacts produced by the workshop participants. And to do this under a broader framework of vertical case study analysis, so developed by Fran Vavris and others in the field of comparative education, to be able to have a good understanding of the vertical components and the horizontal components in this chain of educational transfer. So this is the vision for our way forward. And Kirk, I'll turn it back to you to summarize.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Trying to multitask here. I'm going to keep it relatively short because I do recognize we're over time and want to invite some discussion. We do have extra time here. The organizers did give us more than the hour that we had envisioned. So we're fine to continue, and it's great to see that we have, frankly, everyone still as a captive audience. So thank you for everyone for your time, especially across the varying time zones. Summaries. What are the issues? Of course, we've talked about youth in small states, and that was certainly elucidated very well by Mairette and Gary. Gary certainly spoke deeply about the complexities of educational transfer, some history related to the colonial and the post-colonial context relative to what is imposed to what is willfully or freely borrowed. And he talked about this different stages, which I thought was very interesting, around everything from decision-making to implementation. The complexities or the diversity of the partnerships. The umbrella is the Consortium, which is Commonwealth Secretariat, University of the West Indies, Commonwealth of Learning, and they are seeking more and more partners to participate. And then University of the South Pacific is a case in point. And Mairette also showed that lengthy synopsis of the different country partners, small states and larger states, in this initiative. The challenges, Sam certainly touched on this, and Gary as well, from the Fiji workshop in June 2019. Very participatory, very deliberative, segmenting participants into different groups to develop competencies and other aspects around the 7 courses to make sure that they're contextually relevant, and will ensure, you could say, the more uptake by prospective current youth workers in the region. Sam also touched on the fact that these courses will be freely accessible. I messaged in the chat box on the side that we're aiming to have these released in the second half of 2020. They're currently being developed. And of course, we're always looking for new partners, and we look forward to hearing some inputs from the panel or from the participants momentarily. And that segues to the possibilities around scaling this initiative. As I said in the initial remarks, 60% of the Commonwealth are 30 and under. Gary touched on how we might define youth. Some do define it as younger than 30, some younger than 21. But nevertheless, I think we would all be in agreement that there's tremendous opportunity both within and beyond the Commonwealth in responding to the needs of youth. And of course, the other exciting part of this as well is this notion of South-South partnerships. So Commonwealth of Learning is an intergovernmental organization. We really we see ourselves as a lever to try and facilitate such arrangements. And this new initiative, this project that the grant that Lakehead and Cole has won, it was under Gary's leadership that we got this award, shows how we could perhaps expand this into one of the regions that he mentioned, which is the Caribbean. So I'll just leave it at there. That's a very quick synopsis with the intent that we can engage in discussion. So I'm going to mute my mic, or I'll mute it, but perhaps I'll also be facilitating and invite open the floor up for any questions, comments based on this presentation. Thank you.
Hello.
Is this a question?
This is Professor Mukasem from Bangladesh Open University. Actually, I am late in joining this particular session. So I was wondering about this particular summary that you mentioned about the collaboration in youth in small states and educational transfer. In Bangladesh Open University, we are also
having some online activities because of this particular corona situation. And in the near future, we would also love to extend our program. And Dr. Amina already came here last year, and we had a very fruitful workshop. And we are also developing the undergraduate program in youth development, and hope to have a better collaboration with all the universities and all concerned stakeholders. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your remarks, Mr. Nareen. Anyone else that would like to offer any remarks?
Hello. Hello, am I audible? Hello, hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. This is
Okay. My name is Godfrey from South Africa. I see that in the presentation you covered some of the universities that are actually part of the consortium. And today, towards this meeting, I spoke to the University of South Africa, the senior lecturers, and as well with the University of Stellenbosch, who are having an interest to become members or to collaborate with the consortium. I had some line talking about maybe the memorandum of agreements, which I'll appreciate if I can be guided on that. And the University of South Africa in particular, they are having the higher certificate in which now they want to have a degree. And in the degree that they want to have, they want to use already the ones that the Commonwealth is having, and they will see how they blend it into, or they localize it in the context of South Africa. So I'll appreciate if as well I can be guided about that. Thank you.
I'll gesture to my colleagues to respond, perhaps.
Yeah, I can respond to that. Thank you very much for that inquiry. So the process is relatively straightforward. I mean, I don't want to take up time now going through every single step, but if your university is interested in participating, you can either you can shoot me an email in the first instance. My details are here on the summary slide at the end. Just send me an email and I will put you in touch with the administrative arm of the consortium. It is really led by Dr. Osman. I mentioned her earlier in my presentation. And it is a process. So it starts obviously with a conversation. Each institution has a different, a different set of characteristics, a different set of needs, and we tend to respond to that. We do already have a university from South Africa as part of the consortium, and we're, open to involving other universities, even within the same country. That's not a problem at all. So I can put you in touch with the right people. As I said, just send me an email, not a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you both for the question and response. Anyone else have any questions or comments? And of course, you can always type them in the chat room as well if you're more comfortable doing that.
Hi.
Yes, hello.
Pooja this side. I work for the ComSec. I worked on the consortium for a bit. I was just curious about what Dr. Pluim mentioned, that there's this partnership that he spoke about with the UN and the Lakeside, and I was curious how it came about and what was initially thought of its construction in the beginning.
Sure, I can speak to that. Hi Pooja, nice to meet you. Thanks for the question. I was involved with the workshop at the University of the South Pacific. And as you can see from the presentation, all of these issues are always at the forefront of our discussions, right? The complexities, questions about the efficacy of the workshops in relation to the broader professionalization of the field, ethical, critical issues, and so on. And so in my role, so I wear a number of hats as well, but and in my role as a professor, this facet of research was of interest to me. And in speaking with Kirk and Mairette, we talked about this idea of developing this as an arm of the actual work of the consortium of VUSC, and through Cole, we developed this partnership where as we go forward with these processes of the workshops, that we can have this research arm that looks at this alongside. So what I did in partnership with people at Cole through Kirk in particular, we developed an application to the main research body in Canada, which is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, SSHRC for short. And we developed a proposal that talked about all these issues, that spoke about our vision for this, and proposed this methodology, which is grounded in these areas that I mentioned: vertical case studies and video-based observation and so on. And we submitted this proposal, and it was accepted a couple months ago, 3-4 months ago. So our work right now, the next year or two, is to sort of develop a workshop in which we can really look at some of these nuances and look for ways through the data that we can make connection to the broader professionalization of the field in the site that we end up going with. I should mention, by the way, that this, everything changes right now in our current climate, right, with the COVID virus. So we're in the process now of sort of reimagining what, if this is going to look exactly like the way we proposed, or if this will look a little bit different.
True. There's this follow-up question, just very quick one. So there's plenty of research already that's existing, and probably instead of waiting to conduct new pieces of research and finalize and formalize them, would you want to delve into what's really existing at the moment and kind of build on it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and if you're privy to some research, I'd love to look at some other aspects that are happening right now. The research that we're doing is very specific to this context of the workshop and the connection of the workshop in the particular location, and to look at ways that it might be generalized. So it's very, very kind of practically based to this circumstance. I'd love to see some more, and Pooja, my email is in this list of chats. If I'd love to follow up with you further.
That'll be brilliant. I'd love to speak more about it and not take more time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Pooja. We'll take maybe 5 more minutes. We'll maybe try to end at, I guess it'd be 12:30 on our side, 3:30 on the eastern side of Canada or in North America.
And I'm joining from India, and it's about 12:30 a.m. for me.
Yeah, very late. Well, that's great. It's wonderful to have your contribution. Anyone, maybe at the panel, maybe as people maybe are thinking about questions they might want to pose, any remarks maybe from our panel, from Gary, from Sam, or from Mairette, based on some of these remarks, or any new ideas? I'd like to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'll raise one, if it's okay. I'll just raise one question. I don't have an answer, but it's just something that I think we have to bear in mind, that even as we talk about contextualizing and customizing, tailoring materials for a specific region or country, I'm also very conscious that even within a small country, there are sometimes some variations that make that very contextualization very complicated and complex. And I'm thinking here particularly about countries where there are indigenous populations, for example, or countries where there are issues that are peculiar to a particular ethnic group. And that raises for the youth and for their livelihoods and their well-being a lot of issues. So it's not always just about contextualizing something for a country, or it's not about thinking about across countries, but it's also thinking about within the country itself, that there are diversities that have to be addressed. So just want to kind of throw that in there to sort of make the point that this is very, very complex. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Pauline Whiteman from Trinidad and Tobago. Excellent point, Mairette, because although in Trinidad and Tobago we are only 1.5 million, yes, when tailoring programs, we have several groups that we need to target and therefore contextualize whatever we're presenting based on the nuances, based on the characteristics of those groups. So it's a very, very complex, it's very, very complex. And that's an excellent point. I just wanted to say that.
And one small that I want to ask is, when talking about the small states, which countries are the small states?
It's quite a range. There are 31 small states in the Commonwealth and 50 globally, generally defined as 1.5 million approximately. So there's quite a group there. I won't go through that list, but there's certain clusters in Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific.
Okay.
Although, if I might add, Kirk, very quickly, that the modules that we're developing are not necessarily customized for small states per se. That's where the need is, obviously, but these could be used by anyone, anywhere else. And the point that I think that Mairette was talking about, the nuances of local situations, is well taken. And but that doesn't mean that we have to capture everything, every nuance and every little thing in a module. The module or the course or the short course will be not very different from many other short courses or modules in other areas of educational practice. But when the rubber hits the road, if I can pursue that metaphor, Kirk, a little bit, is when these modules are facilitated by practitioners in the online mode. That's the beauty of it, that the nuances and how the content and the experiences apply in that local situation will be part of the teaching and the learning process. And that's what the learning and teaching process is. So the online learning environment that we are talking about, on which these courses or modules will run, will have the capacity. And I'm hoping that, there's so much expertise around this panel itself that some of you might want to venture into participating in the teaching of these modules. I can see expertise everywhere around. So once these modules are developed, we'll be looking for people not only to take these modules, but to facilitate these modules in their region, in their context. And they might want to take a different stance from someone else from some other region. So a lot would be, a lot would come out when the actual learning and teaching transaction is going to take place. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to jump in here if it's okay, Kirk, just to kind of bring together what Pauline said earlier. Pauline was speaking from Trinidad and Tobago, and what Son just said. I think that those two contributions, and I want to kind of concretize this a little bit. This is the challenge. I mean, we called this presentation Issues, Challenges, and Possibilities. And I think that the challenge is this idea that we have this material that is generic, but can be tweaked by persons in a way that it suits the needs and the context that they're going to work in. And I'm going to give you an example here. There is one course that has proven to be quite popular whenever we have released the materials to an institution, and it is a course that it will go by different names, but essentially it focuses on supporting youth in grief and in trauma. Okay, so that is the nature of the course, is about how do you go about supporting youth in grief and trauma. So using this as an example, you will find in countries like that course will share the same principles regardless of the country, but the examples and the specifics, and you were talking about these case-based scenarios that you're using some in the Pacific, will have to be tailored to the issues in that country. So for example, in Jamaica, that course has to be about helping youth whose parents are incarcerated, because that is a huge problem for our youth. Their parents are incarcerated, not necessarily in Jamaica, abroad. Their parents go abroad, become part of the prison population for a variety of reasons related to drugs. But in another country, like Guyana, for example, the focus has to be on youth suicide, because they have a population there where youth suicide, as it relates to young men and women, is a major problem. It's underreported, but we all know it's there. So the nature of the problems varies in its specifics from one country to another. And the challenge is finding individuals who are part of the university faculty, who can not only do what Sam is talking about, prepare these materials so that they are appropriate for an online environment, but can also draw on their experience in the field of youth work and their scholarship and academic background, and bring all of those things to this one space. And that's a challenge, because the truth is there are very few people who have all of those skill sets. So we have to work at this as a team of people, you know, who each bring something to the space. And that's very challenging, because the person who is a youth work practitioner could not care less, quite frankly, about whether this material is digestible for an online environment. They don't care about, you know, learning outcomes and how you in that way. Sorry, I'm rambling on a bit. Let me shut up.
Thanks, Mairette. I think I think on that note, I mean, again, these issues are very, you know, can be very visceral, frankly, whether you're talking about issues of suicide, incarceration rates, amongst all sorts of other issues. And I mean, we're on the cusp of perhaps a global recession with COVID. We don't even know what's going to happen in 1 or 2 months' time. So these issues are certainly going to become much more real, I think, in the near future. So I think it, again, illuminates the importance of our work. I'm going to maybe offer the last word to Gary, and then perhaps we'll sign off. Gary, do you have any closing remarks, given Sam and Mairette have made some last their last contributions?
Yeah, I don't have much more to say other than it was delightful to have such a broad representation today from participants. Just thanks for everyone for attending, and especially sharing in the Q&A at the end.
Great. Yeah, I think we'll leave it at there. We went 35 minutes overtime, but I think it certainly, you know, I think reinforces the interest, the importance of this work. And again, the participants have stayed more or less constant. I think we peaked at about 22, and now we're at about 19. So again, you have our emails there, and I put them in the chat. So certainly take a screenshot of that or write those down, and we look forward to engaging with you as we widen our network. So again, thanks very much to everyone. Gary and I will do our best to respond to your emails about how we can share our deck. I can certainly share your deck if you send me an email. There's no issues there, but the video that we've been recording. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you to my friends and colleagues, Gary, Mairette, and Sam, and to all of you for your participation and your attention. Stay well.
Are we debriefing now, or are we going to meet at another time? You heard me, Kirk?
We can
Yeah,
do that.
we still have people on, but why don't we?
I'll send another quick Zoom link where it's just the four of us. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.